Accountability in the workplace. I want to explore this idea that I've had, and one of the problems with businesses in general, and the way that our current corporations, the way that they are run, it makes it in such a way that there is no accountability. And what that means is that we don't have, so for example, whether it's, the manager or the trainer, the person training you, or the teachers, or whoever it is, or even the workers, because of the way that, because of the power structures, right? It's very similar to a family, right? When you go to work, your parents in a household, the parents have authority, right? And so when a parent has an authority, over the offspring, it makes it so that they, even if they are wrong, because they are in a sense of authority, the offspring, the next generation that is begotten from the parents, is that correct? Yeah, I think. Well, you guys, you know what I mean. Like, when you're dealing with an authority, you can't really speak up sometimes, right? Because if you do, they might take away some benefit. And so a lot of times, when you're dealing with your parents, right, there's nothing you can do because the offspring, they rely on the parents for money. And so they can't really, they have to, they depend on the parent. So the parent could be wrong all the way and there's nothing that could be done. So in the same way, when you're dealing in the workplace, it's the same kind of thing. That power struggle exists because they could be doing everything wrong. The leader could be doing everything wrong, but there's nothing you can do because there's no accountability. Now, what I wanted to talk about, so that's one way of how it plays itself out, is that the reason why nothing gets corrected is because most of the time, the employer is better off just saying nothing or just letting it, just saying nothing so that, because it's better to not rock the boat, to not, you want to be in good grace, right? You want to get along, and so sometimes you play along to get along. So what that means is there's not really a corrective measure, and because, let's say the leader, you don't really know, the leader may not ever, even if you did offer a good advice, the leader might not want it. You just don't know what'll happen, so you're better off just not correcting, just not doing anything. But the thing is, when it comes to accountability in the workplace, the reason why in businesses, oftentimes, whenever a decision is made from an executive level and passed down, it's almost impossible for it to be, for anybody to correct it. And that's really what I'm talking about here when it comes to the accountability, because a lot of times they'll say, well, is it working or not? And the problem is, no one will ever say that it's not working, even though it could be the worst policy ever. And just to give an example, you could have, let's say, a horrible training protocol, a horrible training program in a workplace, but because, and people might not get a job, just because of it. Like, let's say they have a horrible training and the trainers, they're not really teachers, they don't know what they're doing, but they have the authority, right? They have the clipboard, they have, or whatever, I don't know how to draw a clipboard, but like they have the clipboard, they have the authority. And the thing is, you could have great candidates that are losing out on the training, and it's just because of poor practices that nobody knows what's going on. Because at the end of the day, the let's say you could have a system that is broken, or a rule. It doesn't even have to be training. It could be the way that a procedure is followed in a let's say there's a new rule that people have to do at work, and in order to measure the performance, or to assess it, to be able to see if it works, a lot of times, if it works, you can't tell if it works or if it doesn't. Because oftentimes, if it doesn't work, the management or whoever it is, the leader, they can always just point outward. They can always say, well, it was the employee's fault. Or, well, they can't keep up. Or, there's always an excuse. There's always a reason. And it creates this environment where in the corporate world, nothing is accountable. Like, nobody wants to take the blame. Because if you take the blame, people don't want to get disciplined. And so that creates an environment. It's weird because it's just so weird how in businesses they're always like, well, we want people to be open. Okay, we could be open if there were tenure, like in college, and professors. That's what tenure is all about. It's about freedom. But most of these corporations, it's like on the one hand they want to say, well, trust us, but then on the other hand, you can be let go of the company for any reason. So why would anyone, it's just this weird thing where why would anyone be honest? And it's not about honesty so much. It's just that why would anybody say anything? It's not even about honesty. It's about people, nothing gets done. There's no accountability for anything. So if something good happens, people take credit for it without understanding what caused it. And then if something bad happens, or if a plan, if a training session, if the method that is used to do something is wrong, they are, whatever happens, no one will sort of own up to it. Because if you own it, there's the risk. It's the same thing, actually. It's the same. It's not just, a lot of people, they think that, well, the managers are in charge and the employees are kind of, the employees are scared, right, to be let go or to be disciplined. But it's actually, it's the same thing also with the managers and the leaders, believe it or not. They're also not their CEO either. So they're actually kind of like employees too. Their jobs are not 100% secure either. So it's just weird how everybody is kind of everyone is just like the accountability. It's almost impossible to know how things are actually going. You would need an analyst to actually do that. But even an analyst is not right? Because sometimes, corporations, they'll hire an outside, these are called they're analysts. Basically, they are there are consulting firms, okay, that come in and say oh, well, this is how you can improve it. Now, usually, in my opinion, they are not relevant. In most cases, the use case is so specific that, a consulting, I guess, would be good for someone who has no business experience. And I guess that might, you might want to help someone out like that. But if you already know business, in my view, a consulting firm is not really going to be able to help you in specific instances, because most people who consult, they're not an expert at what you do. This is similar to how, this is something that, like Mr. Beast, okay, from YouTube, he's talked about this concept that nobody knows your business better than you do, right? So you can't, if you're a Costco person, right? Nobody understands Costco better than the Costco CEO, or the founder, I should say. Because a lot of most companies are so specific that what makes them tick is something that only the CEO or somebody who's been there long enough really understands. So if you just bring an outsider, usually they won't understand all of it, but it depends. It depends on how well they've I guess it depends on how open. It's possible, but usually it's not. And unfortunately, third party, I've noticed that a lot of third parties, not only do they charge more, but they also tend to, when they also tend to not always, they want to do things as quick as possible, right? And so that's another thing too. You want someone who is willing to sit down and sacrifice and spend hours, because that's really what creativity is about. It's about someone spending hours, somebody spending hours analyzing and trying to understand how something works. And that's very rare to find. So, but let's go back to, accountability. And, I just wanted to talk about how a lot of times the things that we see in the workplace, sometimes we feel like it's impossible to get people to understand what is happening, or to get people to not only to admit it, not just because people are afraid of getting disciplined. That's not the only reason. I think a lot of it is because people don't. When you talk about accountability means being able to accurately tell what is happening, and being able to assess if something is good or bad. And I feel like in today's world, a lot of bad practices continue because nobody wants to understand. Nobody wants to actually take an honest approach to it, an honest look at it. And even when you do, you don't know if the people in power, if the leader is open to that. There's just so many factors, just too many factors happening at the same time. And they might not realize that they even have a problem. That's what I'm saying. So it all depends on, you need a leader who is open-minded, and then you need the accurate sort of, and a lot of people think that a lot of times, like I said, it's not just a matter of numbers, right? Because the numbers could be all right. You could be looking at a spreadsheet, right? And the spreadsheet looks fine, or they're making money. Do you know what I mean? But that doesn't mean that it actually works as best as it could. And I guess you might argue, well, as long as you're making money, that means it's the best, or that means that it's passable. But at the same time, it also represents that you could be making more money, so to speak, or it could be going in a different direction. It could, in other words, understanding, and I may be going too far, but the thing is, you never know. Most people who are, you just don't know who is in power and how intelligent they are and how attuned they are to what they are doing. And sometimes there are practices within a company that are that don't work properly, but they never get corrected. That's kind of what I wanted to talk about, is this idea that because there's no accountability, it feels like even when you do something wrong, creativity is an inherent part of understanding something. And without the creativity, it's not enough to just have knowledge and data. You need creativity, believe it or not. Creativity is part of everything that happens, including even in the most logical realms that you would think where everything is established. Creativity still matters. And that's something that is not quantifiable. It's not something that you can always tell if somebody has, if they're able to be able to have the foresight, the insight to be able to see what is happening, or what truly is happening. And so what I mean by that, so I guess okay, so what I'm trying to say is that you could have someone who is, or you could have a project or a person or whatever it is, and it can be successful on the paper, but it's actually not having results. And a lot of it, and I know that might not make sense, but let me explain what I mean. Like, you can have, because of the accountability, you can have something, like a company can be so successful in some ways that it covers up the other problems, and that everything else just doesn't matter, I guess. And the issue is, like, you could have something that seems, and what happens is, let's say you have a project and it replaces something that worked before, but then when the project fails, right? Let's say the project fails, and the project fails, then people might blame it on, well, it was just meant to be, or it just happened, or the times have changed. But really, it could have been saved, but because there's no understanding, like, I guess if there's nobody there to analyze and understand what truly happened, a lot of times, I guess what I'm saying is that there are leaders, there are people who make decisions, and they have an incentive to have it be right. And so if something fails or something wins, it doesn't matter. They'll still, if it fails, they'll say that it was meant to fail. And if it wins, then they'll take credit for it. And it's this thing where there's no accountability. Like, you can't tell what is actually working and what is not, because because nobody is willing to admit that they were wrong. Like, you could literally have a CEO have the worst performance and they'll still spin it like it's positive. And what's weird to me is that it's because, I guess you could say that it really does boil down to, it's because they don't feel secure. No person working at a corporation feels secure. The same way that a family is more secure than a company. As crazy as it sounds, right? Because when you're a family, you're never going to stop being a son or daughter, right? But in a company, you could stop being an employee. So really, that lack of security, job security, is what causes this. So it basically makes it so that everyone is always doing the right thing. Everyone is always saying they're doing the right thing. And if a project fails, it'll just be said, well, that's just how the market works, or that's just, that was meant to happen. And so we try something else, and even if it continues to fail, it'll just always be, more and more projects continue to fail. I don't know how to draw a project. I'm drawing it as buildings. But like, they continue to fail, and there still won't be that, it'll just, people will just write it off as, oh, well, it was just meant to happen. And I feel like it creates this, it just creates a world where there's a lot of things that will happen that just seem unfair to the customer, unfair to the people working on the projects, right? Because they might believe in it. They might pour them like real effort into a project, and then it just fails a lot of times because they don't understand that the project itself was ill-conceived. Or sometimes very good things get destroyed and replaced with something that doesn't work, right? And then they replace it with something else. And then when that something else doesn't work, you might have a good product or a good idea that already works, but sometimes people change it, and then the next thing fails, and then the thing is, and then in the end, everyone just kind of throws their hands up like, all right, well, that's it. And what I'm saying is that I guess that's just how it happens, but because there's no accountability, there's no one that would stand up and say, hey, like, maybe this was right the whole time, or, like, we don't feel, it's always crazy, but you don't feel confident in saying, if one person truly understands, usually it's somebody who understands the company, who has been there for a while, or somebody who just knows, who's just perceptive enough. And that perception is not encouraged in our business world. And I kind of wish that it was. I wish that maybe people felt more secure and more comfortable in being honest in that way, right? Because the way that things are now, I feel like the business world right now, people are too, they're too careful with their words. And it shouldn't be that way. And it's weird because that culture is something that is taught to us. It's not even something that comes from humanity because, when you're in school, right, people feel confident speaking up at school because, you know that you're not going to get suspended or anything, right? Like the worst that can happen. Well, I don't know about nowadays, but, back in the old days, I mean, it didn't feel that way. But with corporations, there seems to be like a culture, and it seems to be something that is taught, right? Like when you watch, any videos or articles on jobs and how to interact, the white collar space or whatever, the office world, that the world is different. And the thing is, people, the way that people interact it's something that's taught to us. And I don't know that it should be. Like, it would be interesting to be able to talk about these things freely, but I don't feel you can, right? I feel like most people, you just kind of watch things, they come and go, and the sense of accountability is completely lacking in the business world. And it makes it so that most jobs nowadays, at least, and I don't know, this may have been different in different times, but nowadays, because a lot of the companies that we have, they are inherited, or not inheritances, but they are legacy companies that have been here for a long time, right? The big food corporations, business, all kinds of, they've been here for centuries. So the original founders are nowhere there. And most of the people currently working and the leaders in charge are people who were not really involved with the original vision of the founder. And so it makes it so that it becomes, it's just there's just a level of randomness. And I think it comes from that. It comes from people who, because they don't own the business, and it's weird to say that they run a business, but I think there's a difference between somebody who runs a business themselves versus someone who is just a leader in a corporation, if that makes sense. So it's like there's a difference between somebody who actually has built something from the ground up themselves, whether it's a hot dog stand, whatever it is, versus someone who is just plopped into a position. Somebody who just became a leader, a manager, a CEO, but it's not their own business. Do you know what I mean? And that makes it so that's kind of what I'm talking about, the sense of accountability, the sense of being able to understand why something happens. And if something goes wrong, you don't feel there's a disconnection between the corporation and yourself when you didn't actually build it yourself. And you don't have a stake in it. And you don't feel like you have a stake in it. And that makes it so that, that's kind of what I'm talking about, where we have these corporations, lots of companies that don't really have they don't really have any sense of accountability. They don't, if something goes wrong, they just keep moving forward. And if something goes right, they don't really understand why. Everything it's just this forward march of companies, and you don't know, and it just makes it so that I guess the world is just not as neat and tidy as it can be. And if you work at a company, which most people do, you basically just have to follow along, and hope that you try to navigate wherever you're at and just do the best you can in this blob of a blob of kind of uncertainty, because everyone is just kind of it's not really logical in a sense. It's not being guided, and it depends on what kind of company you're with. But in most like Fortune 500 companies, most of these big companies, it's kind of it doesn't feel. It feels like there's no accountability. So that means that things are just going to come and go, and you just don't know where you're going to end up or what will happen. That it's kind of this weird thing, and it's because most people don't feel confident in speaking out, because if you do, you might get let go, right? You might get fired or laid off. So why would anyone speak up? And it's so weird, because it's like, on the one hand, and that's the first thing, but then the second thing is the idea of, what was I going to say? So the first is being able to speak out, but the second is the idea is these invisible rules, what I call, like just invisible rules that are just not true. Whoops. Let's see. Invisible. Okay. Just these rules, all of these rules that, well, you have to do things this way. Just invisible rules, concepts that they don't have to be that way, right? Like when we are, having to do with how you dress, or having to do with the way that, people don't, there's a whole culture behind this. I guess this really doesn't have to do with, this has to do more with society than business. But for example, it's better to be, and I've talked about this in my other videos actually, on my Lion King video, the Mufasa, if you want to know more about this, my Mufasa trailer review. But this idea that, the business world seems to have their own ethos, where they think that being courageous is better. Have you seen these, like, what are they called? Those performance tests? Those tests where they test you on, if you're good, or if they, what they consider to be bad attributes, what they think. So everyone has to be a leader, for example. Everyone has to be like courageous, and you got to be a go-getter, and you got to be, and what's weird is, and I talk about this in the Mufasa trailer, like, being courageous is not necessarily a good thing. Being a go-getter is not necessarily a good thing. You gotta be someone who, let's say, who always talks well, right? Don't talk bad. Isn't that what they teach you? Like, don't talk bad about your previous worker, right? Or whatever it is. Like, isn't, all of these things that just undermine, or these attributes. Well, let's go back to the other. The courage, a go-getter, right? Somebody who gets things done, right? Somebody who, all of these attributes that people attribute to being good, but actually they're not necessarily good. Like, to me, it actually limits the power of our creativity, just like I talked about before. It limits, because being courageous is not necessarily good. Courage, you could also be a very careful person, be a shrewd business person. You could also be someone who is not a go-getter, somebody who holds back. That can be a winning strategy as well. It says, well, you have to, be confident, right? That's another one. Confident. They're like, yeah, you have to be confident to be successful. So if, when you do that little test and you say, well, what are you? Are you confident, or are you don't, or if you're, another one is if you're quiet, right? You have to be, you have to be group oriented, right? You have to be, right? These are all attributes. Confident, what is it? Group, or what is it called? Not group. What do they call it? Like working together, right? Being outgoing, that's another one, right? These are attributes that they consider to be good, but are they really? Why? What's wrong if you're listen, I don't care if you're the most unconfident person and you're sniveling and you're shaking, but if you get the business done and if you are able to walk into a meeting and if you have the money, you're the winner. It doesn't matter. Confidence doesn't matter. It really doesn't. What about group? Oh, I don't work well with groups. So what? First of all, most people nowadays, especially this generation, nothing wrong with it, by the way, they're very awkward and quiet, and that's okay. You don't need to be a group thinker. You don't need to work well with groups. You can make it work even if people don't work, or even if people like to be by themselves. You can still, as long as everyone's kind of nice to each other, you can make it work. And a leader should be able to do that. And you shouldn't have to rely on people who just always get along, right? Or even if they don't, you can teach people this, right? So it doesn't even matter. The assessment, these tests that try to get you to be a certain way, again, it's not essential. It's not an essential part. You could run a successful business without having people who are just quiet. And every once in a while, you are going to get people who are quiet. And people's personalities actually change depending on the environment. So maybe your environment is not, conducive to that. So that might be another reason. And then the other thing is outgoing, right? Like, yeah, that's a great personality trait, but you don't have to be outgoing, right? Like some people, even if you don't, every single attribute, like you could be someone who is, who likes to be to themselves a little bit and maybe doesn't like pursuing new things. And once again, you could have someone who is the opposite. You need a little bit of balance, a little bit of everything is good. No attribute is good or good. Again, courage, same thing. Courage means that you're reckless. That's every single word that we say that is good can also be bad. It can also be reckless, right? And the opposite of courage, people would say is cowardly, right? But you know what? Another good word for cowardly is carefulness. I talk about this in the Mufasa video, the Mufasa review. Look, I'm writing really, that says courage. So see, courage, it can be reckless. In my view, another word of courage is reckless. So there you go. See, you could, just because it's good doesn't mean that it has to be. That's what I'm saying. I'm tearing down the entire concept that people think that, that's good because of this. No, it's not. Same thing with go-getter. A go-getter could just be an impetuous person, an impulsive person. See, now all of a sudden go-getter is not a good word, isn't it? So maybe it's better to hold back. What about confident? Confident means that we associate that with a good thing, right? But really, a confident person could be someone who's just fake, who's just putting on a show, but they don't actually care. So why is that valuable? How is that valuable to me? Why would I want to be with a confident person if you're fake? I don't know what your heart, that doesn't tell me anything about your heart. Somebody walks in, wow, they look confident. That must mean they're going to make this company better. No, it could just mean they're just being fake. And the thing is, that's not to say that they are necessarily. I'm just saying it could be. I'm just saying that it's not 100% good. And the opposite of confident is not bad either. Somebody who's nervous and not confident and doesn't feel, that doesn't mean that I can't make them confident. That doesn't mean I can't work with them, right? Or what's the opposite of unconfident? Like nervous, right? If I walk in and I'm going to say, I'm a nervous wreck, why would a leader be like, oh man, why would they think anything of it? Why would it matter? Doesn't mean anything. You could be the most confident person ever and know nothing. And you could be the most nervous person and really care. And if anything, a nervous person probably cares about what they're doing. That's why they're nervous, right? Most people who are nervous, they care, right? If a guy likes a girl or whatever it is, if one person likes another person, being nervous is kind of natural, no matter who it is, whether it's a guy or a girl being nervous. It doesn't matter. They're both nervous, or that's not a sign of weakness at all, actually. If anything, that's a sign of honesty, and it's a sign that it's actually happening. Because biologically, when we are confronting something amazing, we get nervous, okay? When a scientist makes a huge discovery, they're nervous. Nervosity, is that a word? I don't know. I'm going to look that up later on. You guys could tell me if I just made that up. But nervousness, I guess that would be the noun form. Nervousness is actually a good thing. It means that you're doing something authentic and you just did something amazing. If anything, I want a nervous person, not a confident person. Okay? And likewise, somebody who works in groups, someone who works with groups, I mean, that's great, obviously. But what if the group isn't very good? Or what if there's just so many factors that prevent it, because you could need somebody who is good at working by themselves, right? Because we're going to have to go work by ourselves sometimes. So you don't want just someone who's group oriented. And even if they have a hard time working with a group, that doesn't mean they can't learn to do that, right? Or that they can't do it. Like, really, I mean, being in a group isn't a part of being in a group accepting. So really, is it really a thing that comes from you, or is it just the group itself? And why not talk about the group, right? Why not encourage people to be accepting? And then you don't have to be good at joining a group. Being group oriented is something that it's the group's responsibility, which as a leader, if you're the manager, it's your responsibility to make the group happen, if that makes sense, to get them to get along. That's your responsibility. It's not the employee's responsibility to get along with, that's not how it works. It works the other way around. So really, and you can create that environment, like I said, to do that. So that's not even something that is your fault, right? Because you can go walk into a room, and if the people don't accept you, that's not your fault, right? That's the other people who have. And usually the other people, they're taking the cues from someone or a greater culture. But as a leader, the leader has to come in and say, hey, let's change this. Let's all get along. And for that moment, they get along, even if they don't get along outside of the workplace. Okay, and then the other thing too, outgoing, right? Just because you're outgoing, I guess, why does that have to be better, right? You could be, maybe you don't want to be going outside. That would make you a more focused person. I mean, if you're always outgoing, that means you're always stimulated. You're overstimulated. You're thinking too much on the outside world and not connecting with the inside. And sometimes, in order to come up with great ideas and business ideas, you need to connect with the inside, right? So look at all these ideas, all of these concepts. And the reason why I'm talking about this, I guess I'm kind of going off here. What does this have to do with accountability in the workplace? Well, because all of these things are things that prevent us from having accountability, because these are the invisible rules that they're following. I should probably make another video about this. But yeah, these are the invisible rules. And it all has to do with why there's no accountability in the modern workplace. And there probably won't be. And a lot of times there's no rhyme or reason. The reason why I'm saying this is because, unfortunately, the most popular companies, and unless it's like a simple sort of business model where you can't really get it wrong. But when it comes to with the majority of businesses, they make so much money that they can afford to lose a lot. And that's what's happening. But I'm just trying to say that if you're wondering why is this happening? Or you feel like there are inefficiencies, and I'm just here to tell you, hey, there's no accountability. And that means that you're probably right and it doesn't make sense. And your job is just to do the best you can, because I know most of you, most people, they're there to work, right? They're there to make money. So, but the thing is, I just don't want you to think there's no rhyme or reason sometimes for a lot of the reason for why things happen, right? And so for why things might get shut down, why a project might get shut down, why people might get laid off, why something happens, it might just, a lot of it is, there's no rhyme or reason. And that's kind of just how businesses run. But the worst part is, I guess what I'm trying to shatter is not to say that that's just how it is, no, or that it has to be that way. No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is it is specifically tied to these invisible rules. In other words, they're kind of, I feel like there's kind of people in our society, like the whole framework is just an illusion. I don't know. It's just like none of the things that they say is important in my view. Like the world is just so much bigger than that. And a lot of the rules, a lot of the things that happen, it's just, I don't know. It's just not, it's not real. It doesn't, and it gets in the way, I think, because people, at the end of the day, people don't feel confident in speaking up or saying, because, and I guess because, we're all humans and we all come up with different, I don't know how to say it. We all come up with different, that I guess at any one time, there's too much variety. There's too much, there's too many different kinds of people. And so maybe it's a good thing that it's like this. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, because do you really want to be at the whims of every single person? If the person who was leading had kindness and compassion and was intelligent, all of those things, compassion, intelligence, then of course I would trust, right? I would trust that, and a sense of fairness. But we don't have that. And so therefore, maybe, and I know this might sound crazy, but maybe like this, I don't know, maybe it's a good thing that it's like this. I might even propose right now that maybe it's a good thing that the world is nebulous and that it's not clear. And that it's random, because the thing is, it can also work in your favor as well. This weird accountability can actually work in your favor. And so I guess what I'm saying is, maybe the reason why things are the way they are is because most people are not intelligent or compassionate or kind or fair. They don't have 100% of all the facts. And so they cannot make, a decision. It's not possible. Most of the time, you're going to be dealing with workers and with managers and with leaders and with an industry that is not perfect. They're not the most ideal people. And so therefore, you want a system that kind of doesn't give anyone too much power. And so in a way, maybe it's a good thing that there's no accountability. Maybe it's a good thing that it's just this weird blob. It feels like a weird blob where anything goes, and where if something goes wrong, nobody takes, even if it is someone's fault, they don't take blame for it. Everyone just kind of oh, well, it's just meant to be, and just keeps going. And then until some companies just fail altogether. And then it's like nobody, it's like, oh, it was meant to be. Even though their own, it was a miscalculation, obviously. And in some cases it was, in some cases it's not. There's just so many variables, and nobody really cares, because like I said, most people who are working these companies, they didn't found the company. So therefore, because they didn't found the company, they don't feel like, they really don't have ownership of it. So they don't care. And most people, they just, get a paycheck, and then they go home, and then they party a little bit. And so there's no connection to the workplace. So I guess maybe it's a good thing. I don't know. So what do you all think? I will see you another time.